Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Late Night Paranormal. This is Aaron with Suave Sunrise, Midnight, and today I'm here to speak with you about a very interesting creature that has a captivating history that stretches as far back as ancient Mesopotamia. I am speaking, of course, about the vampire. The vampire, in some form or another, has always been a point of interest for humanity. With tales as far back as Babylon, we can see that this concept is heavily ingrained in human history. Today we will be taking a close look at why that is. A vampire can take many different forms. The vampire's appearance, abilities, and their method of creation are all highly dependent on the story that they are contained within. In many older myths from medieval Europe, the vampire is a satanic or demonic entity. However, today's vampire is a human who has died and come back to life due to drinking another vampire's blood. The vampire then preys on humans in order to sustain itself and keep its undead body strong. Vampire-like creatures have been recorded in history books as far back as they go. The Chinese wrote of creatures that would go around consuming the chi or life force of unsuspecting mortals, and the Egyptians wrote of bloodthirsty demons. These types of stories are very widespread and range from ancient Greece and Rome to India, Mesopotamia, Korea, and even Malaysia. However, the medieval Romanian and otherwise Slavic tales of vampires are the stories that contain the quintessential vampire traits that we typically consider to be more common vampiric qualities. In the first written accounts of European vampires, the creatures are understood as revenants or returners, often taking the form of a deceased family member who reappears in the unfortunate guise of a vampire. In such tales, unfinished business such as a desire for revenge is usually what causes the dead to rise. Even something as trivial as a want of clothing or shoes is enough to make the dead return to the world of the living. These creatures, however, would be moored home in a television show like The Walking Dead, rather than something like HBO's True Blood. There's evidently very little appeal or attraction felt for these early vampiric figures. Unlike the English aristocratic vampire modeled on Lord Byron, these early folkloric vampires are peasants and tend to appear en masse like modern-day zombies. Possessing bodies composed of rotting flesh and monstrous visage, these creatures were considered to be possessed by satanic spirits and rose from their graves to wreak havoc on the lives of the living. Interestingly, in Romanian belief, it took 40 days for the soul of the deceased to enter the heavenly kingdom. In some cases, it was thought that it lingered for years or even decades or even until Judgment Day. And during this time, there are a myriad of ways that the deceased family members can succumb to vampirism. It was thought that being murdered or dying by suicide made you a prime candidate for becoming a vampiric entity. Furthermore, many folk tales, stories, and myths around the world begin with folk straying from the forest path and meeting beautiful females, only to discover that they are treacherous demonic entities. Moving away from the plains of Romania to the mountains of Scotland were tales of blood-sucking fairies who haunted mountain paths, and the low roads persisted among the peasant population. The stories claimed that these creatures preyed on unsuspecting travelers, pilgrims, and hunters. These creatures usually appeared as beautiful young women wearing a long green dress that conceals the deer hooves that she has instead of feet. These otherworldly creatures were particularly attracted to the smell of animal blood on male hunters' clothes. While these creatures do indeed hold many similarities towards the modern-day conceptions of vampires, they also have many differences. Both the archetypical vampire and the Scottish creatures hunted in the darkness and rested in graves during the day. But where the Transylvanian monster has to feed once every evening, these Scottish creatures only needed to feed on human blood once a year. Moving on to a different subject. Blood is the archetypical Christian symbol of the soul, which is the essence of someone's life energy. The study of blood drinking and association with vampires is something psychologists have studied in depth. In Freud's world, vampires are projections of repressed sexual longings and fears. To him, the vampire corresponds to feelings of guilt and to oral fixations. Jungian psychologists, on the other hand, believe vampirism and drinking blood is a symbolic expression of our primal instincts. The jester or trickster archetype, Jung stated, is the shadow archetype and deceives sometimes playfully, but more often than not, painfully. As stated earlier, vampires actually appeared in the animistic beliefs of the earliest Sumerians. Long before the hoofed feet were worn by Satan in the Bible, the Sumerians believed in ghostly spirits that sucked the life force out of people's bodies. These creatures were born of the departed soul of a dead person that had been cursed or denied eternal rest because of some unredeemed sin. In Babylonia, China, Greece, and Egypt, and also in Christianity, there is a common thread in that the person most likely to become a vampire was one who neglected religious rituals, or someone who defied the civilization's moral standards. In ancient Babylonia, as in later Christianity, vampires were archetypes for a collective darkness, heretics working against mankind, and ceaselessly devouring the life force of innocent people. The vampire was not a manifestation of one personal darkness from the Freudian unconscious, but a society-wide archetype from Jung's collective unconscious. It is much older than Christianity, and perhaps maybe older than written history itself. Vampire scares in medieval Europe tended to coincide with outbreaks of the plague. During the troubling times of the European Middle Ages, diseases, plagues, wars, and famines, as well as other disasters, were very common, and these events gave birth to a wide variety of folklore tales of dangerous mystical creatures that feasted on humans. Of course, while on the subject of medieval war and strife, it would be remiss of me to create a video about vampires without speaking about what is probably the most famous vampire of all time. I'm speaking, of course, about Vlad Dracula. The name Dracula comes from the Order of Dracul, a knightly order dedicated to protecting Christian Europe from the Muslim hordes of the Ottoman Empire, of which Vlad was a prominent and respected member. Vlad gained the reputation as a cruel but highly effective warrior, as well as the reputation as a gruesome torturer and interrogator who would like to impale his Ottoman enemies on wooden stakes and steel pikes. Stories about his unending hatred towards Ottomans and horrible deaths of tens of thousands of prisoners fueled the myths of the Slavic people, eventually forming a belief that he was a powerful vampiric revenant that ruled their lands. However, Vlad was highly effective at defending his people from the Ottoman invaders, and he also has gained a reputation as a national hero in some places of Romania and Hungary. Personally, from what I've read, I wouldn't go as far as to call him a hero, but he certainly is not entirely villainous either. He did his duty as a leader and protected his people by any means necessary. Although his tactics may seem barbaric to modern sensibilities, the time that Vlad lived in was a time of strife, and I would argue that many of his actions were justified. To understand why Vlad did the things he did, it's very important to understand what his early life was like. At a young age, Dracula was imprisoned by the Ottomans. He wasn't consigned to the dungeons like some common dreg, however, as his station as Prince of Wallachia granted him right to fair treatment. So it was more like being locked inside a luxury hotel room, rather than what we would typically think of as a prison. The Ottomans taught him science, mathematics, and the history of the Middle East. However, it wasn't all luxury and comfort. He was still a prisoner, and as such was subject to interrogation, either for information or as a way to put pressure on his family members. We don't know exactly what happened to Vlad while he was in captivity, but we do know that when he was finally released, he came away with a deep hatred for the Ottomans that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Interestingly enough, it was actually the Ottomans that put Vlad on the throne of Wallachia. They thought they could trust Vlad because he grew up under Ottoman influence. This is very ironic, and I'm sure that the Ottomans were kicking themselves later for this, because Vladiboy betrayed them almost immediately. Vlad's decision to betray the Ottomans did not come lightly, however. Vlad commanded an army of around 10,000 men-at-arms, where the Ottomans had at least 150,000 soldiers at their disposal. Many of these soldiers were the elite Janissaries. Janissaries were Slavic children that were taken by force or kidnapped from their family at as early of an age as 3 years old. They became famed for eternal cohesion, cemented by strict discipline and order. Nobody would blame Vlad for avoiding battle with these armies, but Vlad's hatred spurred him on to challenge the supremacy of the Ottoman war machine. Vlad used his penchant for brutality as a very effective tool against the Ottomans. He would impale enemy soldiers on iron pikes, leaving forests of dead bodies as a warning to his enemies. This broke the spirit of the Ottoman soldiers and made them less effective in battle and more likely to retreat. But Vlad did not impale his enemies just as a pragmatic war tool. He also did it as a means of recreation. This is just hearsay, but it was heavily rumored that Vlad enjoyed eating his dinner among fields of impaled bodies while he was on campaign. And of course, it was said that Vlad drank the blood of his enemies from a silver goblet, as if it was wine. However, there is not any actual evidence of this, and it may have been something that was added later by overzealous storytellers. That being said, Vlad's brutal tactics were absurdly effective, and the rumors spreading that he was a blood-sucking demon only served to further project the terrifying image that Vlad wished to possess. Vlad's tactics didn't only work against the Ottomans. Criminals in Romania were so terrified of being impaled that the crime rate in Wallachia was almost zero. Where the other European countries were overrun with bandits and robber barons, the backwoods hills and dark alleyways of Wallachia were comparatively very safe. So while Vlad was not a good man, he was a good leader and was very effective at keeping his people safe from both foreign and domestic threats. In modern times, the idea of the vampire has become something of a novelty. Countless movies, books, and music, as well as other forms of media, focus on the vampire, and its place in popular culture has gone from being something that inspires terror into something that is part of the everyday media backdrop of society. We've seen the mutation of the vampire from a monstrous corpse on the prowl for vengeance into a distinctly more demure and human-like creature. Hopefully we'll see media creators take the vampire back to its more demonic roots in the near future, as the characterization of the vampire as an emotional human-like creature has become somewhat overplayed in my opinion. Alright, thank you for watching 12th Sunrise. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.